Welcome to the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Valerie Sanderson and I'm joined by Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. Vitaly, on Saturday there is the Victory Day parade in Moscow. This is a huge day in Russia's calendar and traditionally a massive display of military hardware. But that is not happening this year, is it? And why not?
Because the Ukrainians have threatened to attack this parade. And this holiday, Victory Day, the 9th of May, is the biggest state holiday in Russia. I would say, Valerie, it's the pillar on which state ideology rests and state iconography, whatever. The Kremlin is using the past to justify the present. So basically, what the Russians are celebrating is the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in 1945. Now, the Kremlin is telling Russians that Nazism is rearing its ugly head again in Ukraine. Zelensky is a Nazi. His army is Nazi. That's the kind of message that Russians have been endlessly hearing from their TV sets, for example, for weeks and months and years even in the run-up to the 9th of May. So think about this holiday, this parade, as one annual focal point that motivates Russians to continue making sacrifices and fighting against Ukraine. And Ukraine's saying, well, look, there are going to be a lot of Russian troops on Red Square. We might try and hit them with drones. The Russians have responded by saying, if you do that, we'll hit central Kyiv pretty badly.
What about President Putin? Do we know of his movements? Is he going to be appearing in Red Square?
As far as we know, that is what he's planning to do. I mean, that's what he's been doing all these years. He turns up in Red Square, delivers a speech, part of which normally focuses on past events, the glorious victory over Nazism, and then he normally mentions how that victory is applied to today, how the Russians need to continue fighting Nazism and continue, in the footsteps of their glorious ancestors. I mean, the fact that no military hardware is appearing in Red Square this time because of what the Russians are calling the operational situation, meaning the Ukrainian threat, or maybe they don't have enough hardware to showcase in Red Square anymore. That fact is striking enough for the Russians because, the Kremlin cannot guarantee the safety of that hardware. So if Vladimir Putin doesn't turn up in Red Square, that's going to be even more striking and embarrassing.
And what does this all tell us about the conflict at present, now in its fifth year?
You remember how Donald Trump told Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House in February last year that Ukraine doesn't have any cards? Well, now it seems to have some cards in the form of their drone technology. The Ukrainians have been really good, or shall I say skilled, in targeting facilities deep within Russia. Since February this year, they've quadrupled the number of long-range drone attacks on Russia, and that includes Moscow. It's quite obvious, even the Kremlin cannot deny it, that Ukrainians can do it. They've been hitting oil refineries within Russia, oil exporting facilities, defense companies within Russia pretty effectively. Market data and claims by the Ukrainian military suggests that more than 40% of Russia's oil exporting capacity has been knocked out by Ukrainian drones. And that's a big deal, given that almost a third I believe between a quarter and a third of Russian state budget revenue comes from hydrocarbons exports. So Ukraine is hitting what Russia has been using to fund its war. So I would argue that the Ukrainians have been doing reasonably well on their own and with support from allies in Europe, for example. The Ukrainian military is claiming to have been killing and wounding more Russian soldiers than Russia can recruit. So that means that at this moment in time, Ukraine is doing much better than half a year ago.
And what are people in Ukraine feeling about that? I know that you've got many contacts there. What are they saying to you?
You know, Valerie, when I was in Ukraine a month ago, my biggest lasting impression is that Ukrainians are desperately trying to preserve whatever shreds of normality they've got left. I know that, the further away you get from the front line, the easier it is, but it's been 4 years. And for them, it's not a question of whether they like the war or don't like the war, or they want it to continue, or do they want a peace deal of some sort. It's a reality of everyday life for them, like rain or sun rising every morning. That's what they've been living with for 4 years now, more than 4 years now.
So that's Ukrainians. I mean, conversely, do we know how Russians feel about this conflict, which is still being described as a military operation in their country?
Yeah, special military operation. It's more difficult to gauge public opinion in Russia because Russians know if they say something wrong in opinion polls, for example, they can be fined, they can be sent to jail. So they're a lot more reserved in their public opinions, in voicing what they think about the war. If uh, um, whatever opinion polls that are still happening in Russia, if they're to be believed, it would appear that most Russians, the vast majority of Russians, about 70%, support the so-called special military operation. But looking at discussions in social media, for example, I'm picking up signs of discontent. People are tired. People don't like it. What you don't hear is them kind of joining the dots and saying, look, it's because of Vladimir Putin. It's because of him that we are having to pay an enormous and horrible price for this operation. We want this to stop. We want him to stop. No, that's not what they're saying. They're saying is that, if you see and hear any criticism of the war, it would be couched in terms of, this has been going too long. Life is going to be even more difficult soon. And also, we're struggling without the internet. This is one very pronounced trend recently where the authorities have been restricting the internet, especially
And
mobile
that's what they're
internet.
going to be doing in St. Petersburg and Moscow, we understand, this weekend while the victory parade goes on.
Precisely, and that's something that they're doing in an effort to stop Ukrainian drones, some of which rely on mobile internet coverage to locate where they are and where they need to be flying. And of course, it affects ordinary Russians. And it's so different to the kind of life they've been accustomed to. The internet, mobile internet, is part of their life as well as it's part of the daily life of people across the globe. Now it's going, and Russians have been advised to use paper maps, for example. Are they going to like it? No, they don't like it, and that's driving some of the discontent with the war and with the government that I've been hearing.
Vitaly, thank you. That was Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching, and bye for now.